Ja,
Enorm.
hier is
Heel,
het.
heel hartelijk dank, Rabbi.
Bedankt voor het luisteren. Tot volgende week, Bezrat Hashem.
Tot volgende week, dankjewel.
Dank u.
Okay, Rav Tugendhaft, nice to have you here. And please start.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much, Reb Jacobs, for inviting me to share a few ideas to your wonderful group on the other side of the channel in Holland. Holland is very, very special to me, even though I'm over here in England, because I have so much family that lived in Holland, that continues to live in Holland, both on the Tugendhaft side,
everybody.
Also
Yes.
on my wife's side, the Evers side, of course. My wife is the oldest daughter of Fia Evers, who is, of course, Fia Kimchi. So my wife's grandmother was Mrs. Bluma Evers, Zichroina Livrocha. And so any connection with Amsterdam is very, very precious to me, and very, very happy to come and to connect. Maybe I just start off with a little story that you may or may not know regarding my mother, my wife's grandmother, when she was in Auschwitz, Bluma Evers, when she was in the camps. So there was a small group of ladies who discussed emunah, and they discussed Torah. And there was a lady there, I do not know her name, and she was very influential in strengthening my wife's grandmother, Bluma Evers, in her Torah and mitzvahs. Fast forward many, many decades, and my wife's uncles, two of the sons of Bluma Evers, were driving in Bayit Vagan, and they were driving, I think it was my wife's uncle Danny and uncle Binyamin, and they were driving in Yerushalayim. And you know, in Yerushalayim sometimes it happens, lo yoleinu, there is a levaya and everybody stops and the traffic stops and there are hundreds of people on the street. So they were on their way to get some medicine for Mrs. Bluma Evers, and they'd already got it, and they were on their way to travel, maybe to go to, I'm not sure exactly where they were going, but they were traveling together. And there was a levaya taking place. So because this funeral was taking place, all the traffic had stopped. So they thought, if the traffic has stopped, we may as well get out. So couldn't really hear, it was a bit far away, but they'll just take part of the levaya. And after a few minutes, the car moved off and they got back in their car and they were able to continue on their journey. The next day, their mother, Mrs. Evers, Bluma Evers, called them up and said, "How did you know?" They said, "What do you mean? How did we know? How did we know what?" She said, "How did you know? How did we know what?" She says, "How did you know to go to the levaya of that lady who used to teach me in Auschwitz all about Torah and mitzvahs and emunah? How did you know about her levaya to go to it?" And just occasionally in life, we get a little glimpse of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, after all these years, is still running the show, is still behind the scenes, is still, even though we generally don't see him, but just occasionally we catch a little glimpse from behind the curtain. And Mrs. Evers was so happy that her children had attended the levaya of this lady who was such an important part of her life. And they said we didn't really know that that's who we were going to, but this is all part of the Hashgacha Pratis, all part of Hashem's divine providence, part of his incredible plan. I'd like to speak a few ideas to share with you of the Parshias that we are learning right now. We are in Sefer Shemos. Sefer Shemos is so full of emunah, it's so full of hashkafa, of what is the Torah outlook on life, and there are some beautiful things that I have seen and that I would like to share with you. We'll start off with a medrash towards the beginning of Parshas Beshalach, on the posuk that the Bnei Yisrael, they came up from Egypt, they came out. V'chamushim olu Bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. It's in the fourth posuk, the second posuk in this week's Parsha, that the Bnei Yisrael, when they left Egypt, they came up Hamushim. Now, what does Hamushim mean? So, the Hamushim, Rashi gives us the simple explanation, and he also gives us another additional midrashic explanation, because we know that the Torah can be understood on so many multiple levels. There's pshat, remez, drash, side, the simple explanation, the allusions, the deeper way of understanding it based on other cross-referenced sources, and also the Kabbalistic deeper explanations. And we know there's shivim ponim l'Torah, there are 7 facets to the Torah. So Rashi gives us a simple explanation and a deeper explanation. What does it mean that the Jewish people came up Hamushim? So the first explanation is brought in the Mechilta, which is that Hamushim means Mezuyonim, it means they came up armed. They came up with some Uzi machine guns, some Kalashnikovs of their day, of their era. Of course, they didn't have those sorts of weapons yet, but they came up with the sorts of armor that they would have had in those times. They'd have had swords and spears and shields and bows and arrows, slingshots. They came up Hamushim, they came up armed. And that is the first explanation. However, Rashi then, and he says that is also what Unkelus also says, that they were weaponized. They came up with their weapons. Then Rashi brings another explanation from the Medrash Tanchuma, and it is a very, very difficult explanation to hear. And this explanation is something that when we hear it, it pains us to hear the explanation. And I would like to discuss that. Rashi's second explanation is that the word Hamushim is not related to armed. It's related to the word Chamesh, which is 5. And Rashi says Hamushim means only 1 in 5 of the Jewish people actually left Egypt. And 4/5 of them died in the days of darkness at the time of the 9th plague. And that's what it means, V'chamushim olu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, that unfortunately only 1/5 of the Bnei Yisrael actually left Egypt, and 4/5 tragically died. They were not up to the challenge, and they still refused to believe in Hashem and to be a part of the Jewish people, and therefore, tragically, they were not part of the exodus from Egypt. How did they die? During the 3 days of darkness, when the Egyptians were immobilized. So during that time, that is when Hashem caused the end of the life of these 4/5 of the Jewish people. And the other Jews that were there, they discreetly and quietly buried the rest of these Jews who had died. So the Egyptians shouldn't notice, because if the Egyptians would realize that the Jews are also dying, they'd say, look, you're dying just like we're dying. There's nothing special about you. You see that this is something which is impacting upon all of us. So here we have it. That's why in those 3 days of darkness, the 4/5 of the Jewish people died. Now, I always found this explanation very, very difficult to connect with, because according to this, if we know that there were approximately 600,000 Jews, there were 600,000 families of Jews who left Egypt. So if we have 600,000 families who left, and we have to assume that 600,000 men and women, 600,000 men, another 600,000 women, So we're talking about 1.2 million Jews who actually left Egypt, not to mention the children, And we know that they had very large families in Egypt. But let's ignore the children just for the moment. If there were 1.2 million who came out, that means that 4 lots of 1.2 million died in the 3 days of darkness, and that is 4.8 million, and that would just be the adults. And if that's the case, it is obvious that at the time of these 3 days of darkness, if there were children who died as well, then it was even more than the number of people in the Holocaust. Now, this is very, very difficult for us to understand, because if we're saying that only 1/5 came out, then it was a disaster for the Jewish people. And it should be a time of great reflection and definitely not celebration. Additionally, it is hard to even say that there were so many people in the world, not people in the world, but let's take it. I'll just hold off on that point one moment to just say some other things. In the Medrash there, if one looks up the Medrash Tanchuma, one sees that even though here it says Hamushim means 1/5, there are other opinions there. And it says, some say it means 1/50th, and some say it even means 1/500th of the Jews actually left Egypt, and 49/50ths, or even, according to some, 499/500ths of the Jewish people died in Egypt. And the numbers that there must have been are so astronomical, it would seem it may even be more than the number of humans that there were on the planet at that time. So how are we supposed to understand this Medrash? How are we supposed to understand even the basic level of the Medrash, which is the one that Rashi brings, that 4/5 died in Egypt? This would have been a huge calamity. Do we really think that the Egyptians would not have noticed if there were so many Jews who were dying, if every Jew was burying another 4 Jews, and it was especially done in the darkness, so that the Egyptians wouldn't notice? Don't you think they would notice if suddenly 80% of the Jews had been wiped out? And according to these other explanations in the Medrash, that it was actually 49/50ths who died, according to the other explanation, that it was 499/500ths that had died, then we're talking about astronomical numbers of, it's hard to say that each Jew would have buried 499 other Jews during those 3 days. So how are we supposed to understand this Medrash, and what is the message for us? We know that the Torah the word Torah comes from the word Torah, which means instruction, and it's there to teach us something. So what is it supposed to be teaching us? So I saw a fantastic answer in the writings of a great rabbi called Rabbi Shimon Schwartz. Rabbi, here it is. Rabbi Shimon Schwartz has a sefer called Ma'ayan Beis HaShoeva, and he was the rabbi of the Yekkers. He was not the Yekkers in Amsterdam, but he was the rabbi of the Yekkers in America. And he had the community in Washington Heights, and he was the rabbi of the Yekcha community, after the war. And he has an enlightening explanation on this posuk. And he says, in order to understand a posuk in the Torah, we always have to try and cross-reference, and we have to try and look at other psukim and see if they shed any light on the posuk that we are trying to find out about. And he says, in order to understand this Medrash, we have to cast our minds back to Bereshis, chapter 4, posuk 10. And it says over there, it's speaking about a completely different topic. But we'll see that this topic will shed light on our own topic. The pasuk says in Bereshis Daled Yud, when Cain tragically kills Hevel, it says, Hashem said to him, Koil demei achicha, Soya kimelai min ha'adomo, that the voice of the bloods of your brother are crying out to me from the earth. And what does it mean that the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Lamed Zayin, says it picks up on one of the words over here. It says, Demei ochicha, the bloods of your brother are crying out to me from the earth. It says it in the plural, the bloods of your brother. Why doesn't it say the blood? Koil dam ochicha. What does it mean, demei ochicha? And Rashi brings two explanations. One explanation is a little bit gory. The one explanation is that he had to do multiple stab wounds until he was able to actually end Hevel's life. But there's another explanation that I'd like to focus on. The Gemara says, what does it mean that the bloods of your brother are crying out from the ground? Because when Cain killed Abel, when Cain killed Hevel, back there at the dawn of time, he didn't just kill him. He killed all of his potential future descendants that would have come from him over the whole rest of history. And that's why, say the sages in Sanhedrin Lamed Zayin, that it says the bloods of your brother are crying out from the ground. You didn't just kill Hevel, you killed all of his future potential descendants, because we are responsible for our actions, not just the short-term ramifications, but also the long-term ramifications of the actions which we do. So using this idea, Rav Shimon Schwab, he brings it back to our posuk here in Parshas Beshalach. He says that really he suggests, and this is quite a chidush, this is quite a novel idea, but he suggests that actually there could not have been so many Jews who died in these 3 days of darkness and who did not merit being part of the Exodus. Really, it was just a few stubborn people who refused to follow Torah and mitzvahs, and who refused to follow Moshe Rabbeinu and be a part of the Jewish people. It was just a few of them. However, these people who, due to their actions, did not make it out of Egypt, are responsible not just that they themselves were not part of the redemption, but they are responsible that their future descendants who would have been born from them and would have been a part of the Jewish people, they unfortunately were not able to come into being because of the actions of their ancestors who were not worthy of being redeemed. And it could be that these future descendants, that these few wicked people would have been so numerous that they would have been 4 times the size of the current Jewish people when they left Egypt. So really, when it says only a fifth came out, what Rav Shimon Schwab in his Sefer, Mayan Beis HaShoeva, is suggesting is that the Torah is holding those few people who didn't come out accountable, that their descendants could have been 4 times or 49 times or 499 times the number of the actual 600,000 families who left Egypt. And it could be, he suggests, that it depending on where the cutoff point is. Are you measuring how numerous their descendants would have been by the time they went into the land of Israel 40 years later, or at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, or at the time of the ultimate redemption that we are waiting for? And that's why there are different opinions in the Medrash as to the numbers over here, how many people there would have been, how many people there could have been as the descendants of these few people who did not come out of Egypt. And in that way, Rav Shimon Schwab answers the questions. And he says that this is an important lesson for not just us, but for the world, because it means that when the enemies of the Jewish people killed 6 million Jewish people at the time of the Holocaust, they are accountable not just for the 6 million, but also for all of the future Jews, our brothers and sisters and cousins, who would have been here had they actually had their ancestors not been killed during the Holocaust. So this is the sombering explanation of Rabbi Shimon Schwab, but it's actually very encouraging because it means that the way we're supposed to understand this Rashi is that not that 4/5 of them died, but really it was only a few people who died, but they're held responsible for the fact that in the future their descendants that could have been born will not be part of the Jewish people. I'd like to move on now to a different point. When it comes to so that was our first point, and that was all about the idea of Hamushim, the idea that they were armed or that they were just a fifth. Another point, here is a slightly scientific point, which maybe the Chosheva people in Amsterdam may appreciate. It says that Moshe Rabbeinu, when Hashem was telling Moshe Rabbeinu about when it would be that Makas B'choros would happen, that the 10th plague in Parshas Boy. So it says, Vayomer Moshe, Moshe said in chapter 11, Pasuk 4, in the book of Shemais, Koyomar Hashem, so says Hashem, Kachatzois halayla, at approximately midnight, Ani Yotzei B'soich Mitzrayim, I will come out in Egypt, and I will do the final plague, the culmination of the 10 plagues, Makas B'choros, the killing of the firstborn. And it's a very interesting expression here, Kachatzois halayla, at approximately midnight. You know, we would expect the Torah to be very exact. The Torah is quite yekish. It's quite exact in its numbers. So we would expect that it should say at exact midnight. It doesn't. It says, Hashem says, at approximately midnight, you should know, when Moshe is telling Pharaoh, at approximately midnight, Hashem is going to bring the 10th plague. And Rashi explains to us that later on, when it happened, it actually says, Vayehi bachatzi halayla, when Hashem did kill all the Egyptians, all of the firstborn, it was at exactly halachic midnight. That's exactly when it was. So why is it that Moshe tells them it's going to be approximately midnight, and then when it happened, it says, and it was at exactly midnight. So Rashi brings from the Gemara in Brochus Daf Dalet that there was a concern that the Egyptian timekeepers would make a mistake, and they might think that it's already midnight, but it's not yet midnight. Rashi says, Shemo Yitu, it's Tagnine Pharaoh. Maybe Pharaoh's astronomers who look to the sky and who work out what the time is, maybe they'll make a mistake. For Yomru, and they'll say, Moshe Badoyehu, Moshe, you're a faker. And therefore Moshe covered his bases and said, it's going to be at approximately midnight, because if you'd say it exactly midnight, then maybe they'd get the time wrong. But really Hashem knows the exact time, and therefore Hashem did it at exactly midnight. Now what is going on over here? How are we supposed to understand this Gemara in Masechta Brachos? Moshe said at approximately midnight, lest the Egyptian astronomers and timekeepers would make a mistake. Who cares if they make a mistake? Let's say that according to their clock, it's already 12:03 and nothing has happened. They're saying, Moshe is a faker, boom. And then 3 minutes, according to them, it'll be 3 minutes past midnight because they got the time wrong. The plague will still happen. So why are we so concerned that they'll make a mistake so that Moshe had to say at approximately midnight? So there are two answers to this. The first answer is quite a classic answer, and that is when it comes to Chilul Hashem, we don't want that there should be a Chilul Hashem for even a moment. We want that people should realize the beauty and the truth of the Torah, and we don't want that there should be any mistakes and people thinking, Moshe said something's going to happen now when it hasn't happened. So therefore, he specially spoke and said at approximately midnight, he didn't want there to be a Chilul Hashem even for a moment. But I have another beautiful answer that my Rebbe, Rabbi Moshe Shapira, explained. Why did Moshe say at approximately midnight? And the answer is a little bit scientific. I ask you, is there an exact point called midnight? Is there a moment which is exactly the middle? Now, we speak about midnight often, and we speak about midday, and we speak about the middle, but actually, the middle in the physical world does not actually exist. You have either the first half of something, or you have the second half of something. But actually, there is no such thing as the exact middle. Now, you may be thinking, what's he talking about? Of course, there's a middle. Let me explain what I mean. I have over here a 15-centimeter ruler. If I ask you to tell me, please, where is the exact middle of this? So you'll say, well, it's obvious. It's going to be at the 7.5-centimeter point. That is where the middle is. But I would say that is not a point. You've either got the first half or you've got the second half. If I would draw a line over here, what the middle is, I could then get an even thinner pen and an even thinner pen, and I could keep on drawing an even thinner line, because the idea of a middle is not a physical place. The middle is a conceptual idea. It is an infinitesimal point. It tends to infinity, and it doesn't actually exist. You either have the first half or you have the second half. There's no actual place which is called the middle. Is anybody with me? Is anybody with me over here? Does anybody see this point? It's a subtle point. The middle is not a physical place. The middle is an approximation of an infinite point that would exist in between two halves, but really there's only the first half or the second half. The middle doesn't actually exist. And according to this explanation, Moshe said, I will take the Jews out. Hashem will kill the firstborn Egyptians at approximately midnight, because otherwise the Egyptian wise men would say, Moshe, you're a faker. If Moshe would say, I'll take you out at exact midnight, they'd say, Moshe, there's no such thing as exact midnight. It's either the end of the first part or the beginning of the second part. But there's no such thing as exact midnight. So that's why Moshe left it vague, because he didn't want them to think that he was saying silly things. He said at approximately midnight. But then actually, when Hashem did take the Jewish people out, it says that it was at exact midnight. Vayhi b'chatzi halaylo. Because Hashem is outside of time, and Hashem is infinite. Hashem is above and beyond time. And so too, the Jewish people are above and beyond the laws of nature. So even though in the physical world, there is no such thing as an exact midnight, but when Hashem took the Jewish people out of Egypt, he took them out and he killed the Egyptian firstborn at a time that doesn't really exist in the physical world and is an infinite point, something that doesn't exist in the world of nature that we have, because the Jewish people are above the laws of nature. We ourselves tend to infinity. We ourselves are, as a nation, indestructible. Unfortunately, individuals are destructible, but as a nation, we are indestructible, Baruch Hashem. And as a nature, we are above the forces of nature. As a nation, we are above the forces of nature. And for this reason, when Hashem did take us out, he deliberately says that it was at midnight. And this is really something which is not a side point. This is core to the Jewish people, that the Jewish people are above and beyond nature. The way, because of our ancestors, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and the covenant that Hashem has made with us, the normal rules of nature don't seem to apply when it comes to the Jewish people. The Jewish people are still here after all these years, despite all of the persecution, and not just existing, but Baruch Hashem thriving and making a massive impact on the whole of humanity. You know, if you had to have a logo for the Jewish people and you were looking for something which is outside of time, well, it's just about inside of time and just about inside of space. What logo should we choose for the Jewish people? If we want to have a physical item to represent the idea that the Jewish people are here in the physical world, but they're above the laws, they're above the normal norms of nature. Nature is normally time and space. Time and space are the features of the physical world in which we live. What logo or item could we use to represent this idea that we are here in the physical world, but trying to escape the laws of time and space? You know what that item would be? It would be a piece of matzah. Because if you leave the matzah for a longer time, then it expands to fill a greater space. And on Pesach, says the Maharal of Prague, we deliberately have matzah because Hashem took us out at a time that is beyond the laws of time. Vayehi b'chatzi halayla. Midnight, there's no such thing. It's infinite. It's beyond the laws of nature. So too, to remind us this, we take a food that is here in the physical world, but it is compressed in time and compressed in space in order to represent this idea that the Jewish people are here in the physical world, but we are tending towards the infinite, and that we are people who recognize the greatness of Hashem, and how the physical world is just a construct that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has made, but really Hashem deals with us above the laws of nature, just in the same way that we understand that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is above and beyond the laws of nature. So that is our second point this evening. The first one was Hamushim, and the second one was Kachatzos. We have time, Rav Paul, for another idea? Okay. So another idea. Okay, so maybe we'll do another idea and then Blineda, maybe a story. Another idea which speaks to me very much. A sophisticated idea regarding the 10 plagues. It's very interesting if you look in Pirkei Avos, chapter 5, Mishnah Aleph. We're told in Pirkei Avos, chapter 5, Mishnah Aleph, that Hashem created the world with 10 statements. It says 9 times in the creation of the world, Vayomer Elokim, and Hashem said, Yehi Oyer, let there be light. Vayomer Elokim, and Hashem said, let there be this, let there be that. It says 9 times, and Hashem said, let there be something. And the Gemara tells us that when the Mishnah tells us there in Pirkei Avos, in the 5th Perek, that Hashem created the world with 10 statements, the first statement was Bereshis, in the beginning of. That was the first statement. Afterwards, 9 times it says, and Hashem said, let there be this, and Hashem said, let there be that. Because the very first statement, it doesn't say, and Hashem said, because there's nobody to say it to. So the very first one, was Bereshis. Bereshis Nami Ma'amarhi. Bereshis is considered one of these statements. And then after Bereshis, it has 9 times Vayomer Elokim, and Hashem said, let there be light, let there be this, let there be that. Now it's interesting that there are 10 statements that were used to create the world, and there are also 10 plagues. Is there any connection between these 10 statements that Hashem used to create the world and the 10 plagues? So one of the great thinkers and deep Torah educators was the holy Rav Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin, who died in 1900. And he explains in his Sefer Pri Tzaddik the correlation, the inverse correlation between the 10 statements that Hashem used to create the world and the 10 plagues. How so? He explains that when Hashem created the world with 10 statements, what was really going on over here is that before Hashem created the world, there was total spirituality. It was obvious. Hashem's existence was absolutely obvious. When Hashem created the world in 10 statements, each statement is like a veil. And you have these 10 veils. If you imagine there's just as an analogy, if there is a source of light, if you put one veil over, you can still see the light shining through. Another one, it slightly stops you from being able to see it. Once you have the 10th veil in place, if you're looking carefully for it, then you'll find it. But if you don't, then you won't notice it. So too, Hashem created the world in order that we should have free will. We should choose whether, like each of you this evening, will listen to a shir tonight, or we'll just turn on the radio or the TV or something else. We have free will. I'd like to thank you very much for making your decision and joining me here this evening. But we have free will. And the idea of these 10 statements is that there are subsequent veils that Hashem put in place, each one according to his divine wisdom, so that there would be a decreasing of the awareness of Hashem, so that it gets to a point where if you're not looking for him, you don't find him, but if you look for him, you find him, and then we have free will. The trouble is that in Egypt, it reached a point where these veils had become like concrete. They had become concretized. And the reason they were like concrete is because the Egyptians were so self-sufficient. They had the river Nile, and they had everything they wanted on tap. They had a wonderful economy, and they had a very sophisticated system of wizardry and magic. The Khartoumei Mitzrayim, they had the best magicians in the whole world, and a great system of dark forces. And therefore, they could not see Hashem anymore. It was as though these veils, which were there to give us free will, were all like hardened, and you couldn't see Hashem. So therefore, what the 10 plagues do is each one of these plagues is like peeling back one of the veils. If the idea of the 10 utterances that Hashem used was to create free will, but that free will had become corrupted in Egypt, so then the purpose of the 10 plagues is like taking off the peels of an onion from the outer one to the inner one. Are you with me? So plague number 1 is peeling away the statement number 10, which was the final statement. Plague number 2 is peeling away statement number 9. And because if Hashem made these veils, they now need to be removed one by one from the outside inwards. So with that, says Rav Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin, we see an amazing thing. We see that if we take the last two plagues, plague number 9 and plague number 10, they're going to correspond to statements number 1 and number 2. So what was statement number 1? Beginning, voracious. What was statement number 2? Let there be light. So now, what is plague number 9? Can one of you help me? Darkness. Why? Because Hashem was telling them, you think you're in control of the light? I'm in control of the light. So because you were not able to see Yehi Oyer, that Hashem, let there be light, that Hashem is in control of light, therefore the lights were turned out. And then when we come to the 10th plague is corresponding to Bereshis. Bereshis is Hashem says, I am in charge of beginnings. So you think you're in charge of beginnings and you can have a firstborn child? A firstborn child is the beginning of that family in the next generation. You think you're in charge of beginnings? No, you're wrong. I'm in charge of beginnings. And in this way, what Hashem was doing is he was revealing himself to the world, because really we are supposed to look at nature and we are supposed to see these are just the veils of Hashem. Hashem is hiding himself, but allows us to see him if we look very, very hard. But because in Egypt, they didn't do that, therefore Hashem had to show, I'm in control of nature. He had to peel back all these 10 veils that corresponded, these 10 plagues corresponded to the 10 statements that Hashem had said. And if we look in nature, we should always appreciate the wonders of Hashem and how Hashem has put so many amazing things into the cosmos and into the world, and in the grandest way and in the tiniest way, and that he is really the one who is in control, and he is the one who is in charge of nature. In fact, the Novi Yeshaya says, lift up your eyes heavenwards, and see me bara elah, who created all of these. And there was a satellite that went up, a telescope that was sent up into orbit. I believe it was just a week or two ago, which is a new telescope that will, through infrared waves, they will be able to see further than any telescope has ever seen beforehand. And from a Jewish perspective, part of us feels, if only they would spend these billions on all of the homeless and on all of the orphans and to try and help people in this world. But on the other hand, when we see how vast the universe is, if we come with a life of emunah, a life of faith in Hashem, so then we look at the vast cosmos, how huge space is, and it helps us to appreciate Hashem's greatness and infinity even more. It's interesting that the prophet Yeshaya says, if you lift up your eyes to the stars and see me, who created Elah, all of these, all of the diversity and complexity of the creation. And the Zohar says that if you take these two words, me and Elah, you look at all of the Elah and you think, who is the me behind it? And you rearrange the letters, you come to Elohim. Elohim is Hashem's name. If you look at all of the Elah, you look at the wonders of creation, and you think intellectually, honestly, who is the me? Who is the one behind it? And then you come to Elohim. And I'll just end with a story, a little moshel, an analogy. There was, the Rambam tells us that if we look at nature, it should help us come to an awareness of Hashem, a love of Hashem, and also an awesomeness of Hashem, an appreciation of how awesome the Almighty is. And it's an amazing thing to look at nature and the magnitude and the complexity and the greatness of nature, and it helps us to appreciate the greatness of Hashem. The question is, if that's the case, you would imagine that all of the scientists in the world should be very, very religious, because they see up close the wonders of creation. So why is it that some scientists are religious and other scientists are not religious? If the Rambam is telling us that by looking at the world, we will come to an awareness of Hashem, why is it there are so many who look at the world and they do not see Hashem? And the Telz Rosh Yeshiva gives a beautiful analogy, a moshel, to explain. He says a person went in to an art gallery. Let's say in England we have the National Gallery. In France, where is the Mona Lisa? In the Louvre. So there's the most amazing, amazing piece of artwork. And imagine in the gallery, everybody goes in and they see this portrait and it looks so real that they take a step back and they say, we can't believe how lifelike this portrait is. It gives us a shiver down our spine because it looks so real. And there's one man who comes in, a very intelligent man, and he looks at it, he says, not so great. And everybody looks at him, not so great, are you crazy? It's unbelievable, it looks so lifelike. He says, no, it's not so good after all, it's not really so amazing. Don't really see why everybody's so excited about it. People can't believe it. They take him over to another beautiful piece of art, another landscape that looks so lifelike, you feel like you're there in the field. And he looks at it, he goes, it's not so great. It's okay, it's not so special, nothing special over here. And they can't believe it. We thought you were an intelligent person. How come you don't appreciate this? And then a man comes over to him. He says, would you mind, please, if I do something? He says, no. And the man does the following to him. Takes off his glasses and he cleans the lenses. And he gently places them back on. And he goes, wow, I hadn't realized. This is spectacular. This is incredible. The problem wasn't with the paintings. The problem was with his own lenses, that his lenses, unfortunately, were dirty, and that stopped him from being able to see the beauty of these paintings. So too, says the Telzer Rosh Yeshiva, when there are so many people, intelligent, highly intelligent people, and they look at the incredible wonders of nature, how could it be that they don't have emunah? How could it be? The Rambam surely tells us that they're supposed to, by looking at nature, it brings us closer to Hashem. How could it be that it doesn't bring them? So he says, maybe it's because their lenses are dirty. They're coming with their own preconceived ideas. They're coming with their own heartfelt bias against religion for one reason or another. And because they don't want to see Hashem, so then they don't see Hashem. And it's not because of the wonders of creation are not magnificent, and that intellectually, honestly, they will lead us to appreciate Hashem, but it's because their own lenses were unfortunately dirty to start off with. So may HaKadosh Baruch Hu help us, each and every one of us, that we should be among those, just like those who left Egypt were part of the most amazing endeavor of all history to be a part of the Jewish people. Baruch Hashem, we are all the legacy of those people. And may we also experience redemption, personal redemption, and national redemption, just like those Hamushim then, and just like Kachatzois Halayla, Vayhi Bachatzi Halayla, Hashem took us out at a time that doesn't really exist, a time that is above nature, just like the matzah, which is trying to escape time and space. So too may Hashem always look after us and protect us and do things that are outside of nature for us. And just like at the time of Egypt, Hashem gave them tremendous revelation, peeled back the layers of the onion, peeled back all of the veils by using the 10 plagues, so that we should appreciate the 10 utterances that Hashem is behind everything. And we saw Zeh Keli, this is my God, and Zeh Keli va'anveu, and I will glorify him. So too, we should always see the kisses of Hashem, feel the closeness to Hashem, and be able to use our lives to make a great Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify Hashem's name in the world through the Torah learning, the mitzvahs that we do, the prayers that we do, the charity that we do, all of the acts of kindness. And I'd just like to close and say this should be an aliyah for the neshama of the person that this shir was initiated for, right? Mrs. Jacobs, Zechreinu Livracha, and all of the others. And we should share many simchas and wishing you very, very well and every bracha be'ezras Hashem.
Oh man, Bishkoyach, for the excellent shiur, and I hope to see you in the next future.
Oh man, okay. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye. Have a nice evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kol tov, be well, everybody. Good night.